There's a lot of people who are uncomfortable with me, you, or a lot of us who are speculating on the conclave.
And so I think sometimes we get this idea that if we don't just kind of pray and keep our mouth shut, we're somehow doing a disservice. If a guy walks out who ideologically has been aligned with Francis, that doesn't mean he's going to govern like Francis. I'm not like blind to the reality that some of these guys are bad actors and should not be and should not be the next pope. You can go to the other extreme where you think it's only a human situation and you're like, if this guy is an elected pope, I'm not going to follow the next guy.
Guess what? Cardinal Muller was made a cardinal by whom? By Pope Francis. Do we consider Cardinal Muller a Francis man?
But I do think the cardinals are aware of what people are saying. If I had to bet, though, which of course I won't, I would say it's more. I'd say it's more likely.
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Saw a great podcast yesterday from Eric Sammons on the Crisis Magazine podcast on YouTube. We're going to put a link to that in the show notes. And then I came across this article this morning from Our Sunday Visitor. Headline says, laying odds on Papabile, our church, our vulgar church by Elizabeth Scalia. Now, truth in advertising, I'm not a big fan of OSB. Elizabeth's just fine, but nonetheless, she basically points out in this article that she doesn't think we should be having any of these conversations. We shouldn't be spitballing, just making decisions, contemplating, being speculative in any way, shape, or form. We should just accept whatever happens. Let the Cardinals do whatever they're going to do. I'm going to push back on that today, even though there is something to be said about the Pope draft.
Are you guys watching the NFL draft?
No, we're watching the Pope draft.
So many good prospects in the College of Cardinals.
Yeah, like Peter Turkson.
And Luis Antonio Tagle.
Okay, it's a wee bit funny, and I get the point, too. I've invited Eric Sammons to be on the team to get his thoughts on all of this. Eric, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Joe.
Well, you broke all of Elizabeth Scalia's rules yesterday on your podcast. I'm going to be honest. You threw caution to the wind, good sir. What do you think about it? You did talk about this in your podcast. I want to expound on that, though. There's a lot of people who are uncomfortable with me, you, or a lot of us who are speculating on the conclave, talking about the Cardinals. And there was a skit that I played a little bit of at the top of the hour. People making fun of the Pope draft, almost like the NFL fantasy football league. We're talking about stats and and all this stuff, and it's fun to do. But are we going too far?
I don't think so. I think what happens sometimes for good intentions, I'm not going to question the intentions of Elizabeth or anybody else about this, but I think we sometimes forget kind of the incarnational nature of the Catholic Church, that we are both human and divine. And if you look at the history of the Catholic Church, it's very messy because it's made up of a bunch of humans, a bunch of men and women who are messy, and we just do human things. It's our nature. There is the divine aspect, obviously, of the Catholic Church, founded by Jesus Christ, will always be with us. And so I think sometimes we get this idea that if we don't just kind of pray and keep our mouth shut, we're somehow doing a disservice. But the fact is that we're human. We want to know who the next pope is. We want to speculate on that. We want to we want a good pope. I mean, I hope we all want a good pope. So there's nothing wrong with saying, look, I'm looking at the 135 cardinals, and I think these guys would be the best pope. Now, of course, there is a danger. You can go too far either way. I think it's going too far to just be like, okay, we're not allowed to ever talk about this. We have to just keep our mouths shut and just pray. I don't think if you're a cloistered nun or something, okay. But for the rest of us, it's totally healthy and normal to talk about these things. That being said, Obviously, you can go the other extreme where you think it's only a human situation and you're like, if this guy is an elected pope, I'm not going to follow the next guy. I'm not going to be in communion with if it's so-and-so. If Cardinal Supich, God forbid, was elected pope, I refuse to be in communion with him or something like that. So I do think obviously there's dangers in both ways, but I think it's just very natural. I don't think God looks at us poorly because he knows who we are. He knows that we like to think about these things. We have our own desires, our own preferences, and there's nothing wrong with talking about that.
In some ways, we're very limited on the kind of information that we really need to truly understand all the players. And this is something that some of my guests have been saying. Just yesterday, I had Father Charles Murr on, and he said, you might be surprised that a lot of these picks that Pope Francis made and raised to the level of a cardinal, they're not the kind of Francis men that you think they are. You could be misjudging them just because it was Francis. I mean, by the way, guess what? Cardinal Muller was made a cardinal by whom? By Pope Francis. Do we consider Cardinal Muller a Francis man? You know, so I think that's part of the issue here is, you know, our speculation and a nickel gets us not very far. However, let me throw another log on the fire. I pulled this up today to illustrate my point from a laity. I'll put a link to it in the show notes today. When St. Gregory was elected Pope, his first thought was to run away. Well, guess who showed up at Gregory's door? That was his papal name, not his regular name. But anyway, says that it was the people, the priests and the lay folk. They're the ones who showed up and said, you're the next pope. It was from a traditional standpoint, Eric, it seems like there was a day when the lay folk had an actual say in who was the Bishop of Rome. At least the citizens and the laity of Rome had a say. So what happened?
Absolutely. I mean, this is something if we look at history a little more carefully, we see the election of lots of bishops, not just popes, but lots of bishops happen sometimes because of like mob rule. I mean, that's basically what happened. And Gregory, I know that story very well because he was a very well-known deacon in the Church of Rome. He was from a rich family. He had helped them through the plague. He had helped them because Rome was decimated in this century. And so when the Pope died of the plague, the people were like, no, Gregory, he's our guy. That's who we're going to have as the Pope. And it basically was acclamation is how he was elected Pope. And he didn't want to be Pope. They had to get approval from the Byzantine Emperor back then. Another case of the human element of the church. You had to get confirmation from the Byzantine Emperor, whoever they selected as Pope. He actually sent a guy to stop the messenger who was going to the Byzantine Emperor to get the confirmation, like, no, stop him so that they don't even ask, I don't want this job. But the point is, all that's like the human element of the church, and the Holy Spirit does work through that. And so I think there's nothing wrong. I do think, by the way, I don't think they listen to me necessarily, but I do think, or at all, but I do think the cardinals are aware of what people are saying and what people kind of want. They're aware of the fact of what things were popular with Pope Francis and what were not. I mean, we hear a Cardinal Casper say the people of God have spoken and they want a continuation of Pope Francis. That's just a bunch of malarkey. The cardinals are more aware than we think of, okay, the American church is more wanting this. The Chinese government wants this, or whatever the case may be. And those will all be factors. I don't think, just to be clear, I don't think they're listening to my podcast. I'm just saying that they are aware of these things. And so I think it's a way that we kind of let it be known. We want a holy, we want an orthodox, we want a courageous, a wise pope. That's what we want. And so that's a good thing. So if we just keep our mouths shut and never speculate about that, you know, I think that's kind of doesn't help with the whole process of letting the cardinals know what kind of pope we want next.
But should the church go back to something that includes the voice of the Catholics of Rome or the clergy of Rome, or does that swing the pendulum back to more of that human element you talked about at the outset of our conversation today? Does it just become a popular vote, but the masses, the mobs, they can be swayed to the wrong direction? I mean, obviously, our Lord lost an election to Barabbas, of all people. So, I mean, was the church wise in setting up the College of Cardinals and taking that element and giving it more control?
Well, if you look at the history of how popes are elected, you see what happened was over time, it became the Roman noble families, the very corrupt Roman noble families, who became the ones who selected the pope. So it went from this acclamation of the people, the faithful, for a Pope Gregory in 590 to by the 10th century, you have powerful Roman families competing with each other, and they're basically saying, my nephew's going to be the pope. He's going to do whatever I say. He gets killed by another Roman noble family. Then they get hit that guy's that family's nephew, and it was just a mess. And that's the reason why Pope Nicholas II in 1059, I think it was, maybe it was 1049, created the College of Cardinals, because he was like, okay, this has gotten out of control. We can't have this. And at first there wasn't such thing as a conclave, meaning they didn't lock them in. And then about a couple hundred years later, I think it was, when all of a sudden it took 3 years to elect a pope. They're like, okay, we need to do something to speed this up a little bit. And so they locked them all in. So we see this development, how things have happened. So I don't think it's necessarily a great idea just to go back to like acclamations like that, because I think what would happen is powerful forces, the George Soroses of the world, the Klaus Schwabs of the world, they would probably be the ones having even more influence than they might have. I think they have some influence today with cardinals, but I think they would even be more influential at this point. So I wouldn't really, I think the system we have can work. I wouldn't mind. I think it'd be interesting if they did something where they had a vote, and the top 3 candidates were set aside, and then they literally drew out of a hat those 3. That would give a little bit more to the Holy Spirit to say, okay, you guys have selected these 3, so you get your 3. You would probably get one who's more ideologically, or traditional or conservative, one that's more progressive, and then just be like, okay, we'll select it out of a hat, and that'll be kind of the Holy Spirit's final vote on that. So that's one. That's what I would like to see, is something like that.
You are brave. I could never. I would be like nail biting the whole time. And maybe they should do that live on television or the
there we go.
Like
Exactly.
from the loggia, habemus papam, and then they're ruffling around, or maybe they get one of those big
Pick a
giant
name out of
things
the
with a
Beretta.
handle. Yeah, exactly. Pick a name out of the Beretta. Oh man, that would be scary, Eric. That would be scary. All right, we're going to be at a break here in a couple of minutes. You also yesterday named your top 7 picks. I kind of want to talk about some of those, but you declined to name who you think would be your worst nightmare to come out on the loggia. Why?
I do think there is a danger that, and Elizabeth Scalia brought up in her article, and I think it's a valid point, that if we get too much on, I want this guy and I don't want that guy, I do think there is a danger that if we get the bad option, that we won't give him a chance. And I personally believe, I think it's important that we give whoever is elected Pope a fair shake, the benefit of the doubt. Like I wrote an article a few years ago saying that Francis had lost the benefit of the doubt, but I made very clear he had it. He should have had it from the beginning. Yeah. Only after his actions over many years did we say, okay, we can't really give him the benefit of the doubt anymore. And I'm afraid that we just immediately close ourselves off to whoever the next successor of St. Peter is and say we're going to refuse to listen to him, because popes have changed in office and bishops have changed in office from what they were before they came into the office.
I felt Elizabeth was being a bit naive, though.
Because you want more, and I want to give it to you. I'm rolling out a brand new membership program for the insiders of this channel. Join today. There's something for everyone. And because you could help me fund the next documentary film, the next book project, audio drama, audio narrations, and other projects that I have been dreaming to work on, but simply don't have the resources to accomplish. You and I together can do amazing things. You want more, and I want to give it to you.
Cardinal Burke has been sounding the alarm. He thinks the situation is grave, which I think further illustrates my point, sort of in contrary to Elizabeth Scalia over at our Sunday Visitor News, in that we have to be involved. We have to be engaged. We need to be an engaged, well-informed, well-prayed laity. And I think that's what Cardinal Burke is asking. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And he's absolutely right. I mean, I think it's obvious for anybody who's followed the cardinals and the church over the years that there's a real deep divide between cardinals. There are a few that are faithful or more traditionally minded, things like a Cardinal Burke, a Cardinal Sarah, people like that. And then there's some that are really on the other side. And a Cardinal Supich, for example, in America, who are very antagonistical to frankly, Catholicism. And so we have this situation. I do think those are both small groups in the College of Cardinals. And I think your bulk of your group are cardinals who are kind of somewhere in the middle. And so how will they be swayed? And so that's, of course, what Cardinal Burke is, I think, suggesting, that through our prayers, through whatever the case may be, our penances and things like that, we can hopefully sway those cardinals in the middle, the Pixmi, who at least is friendly to tradition, who is friendly to orthodoxy, who is not going to be antagonistical to it. So I think that's really what comes down to. And I do think it matters. I mean, I want to make it clear. If a Cardinal Cupich walks out as the next pope, I'm not going to be saying like, woohoo, how exciting. I'm going to be dreading that. I'm going to be very afraid of what that means for the church. I will still give him a chance. Because I do believe in miracles. I believe God can work in any person and can change any person. But I'm not like blind to the reality that some of these guys are bad actors and should not be and should not be the next pope.
Sure, but I just can't imagine, even though there's been rumors about Cardinal O'Malley from Boston, the emeritus from Boston. I can't imagine an American walking out on the loggia. Can you?
They're not picking an American. I'll just put that down right now. They're not picking an American.
But there are Zuppi. Zuppi could walk out. That'd be kind of crazy. Parolin potentially could.
Yeah, Zuppi's interesting because what I've heard is obviously the guy's progressive, the guy's in line with France, a lot of things. But I've heard that he's actually just a good guy as far as like he's been friendly to traditionalists even, and he's not like, personally. So that's the thing is we can't assume. That's the other thing we can't assume. If a guy walks out who ideologically has been aligned with Francis, that doesn't mean he's going to govern like Francis, because there is in the progressive, less so these days, but there is in the progressive mindset, some of them that are of a nature of, let it be. They're not going to persecute the traditional Catholics as Francis did, even if they themselves have a very progressive kind of theology and ideology. So that's kind of one of the reasons I'm also saying, let's not be too quick to judge, how the person will reign as a pope, because we don't know those type of details. And honestly, this might sound a little bit too cynical, but I'm of the attitude that I'd be fine if they just leave us alone. Because if they leave us alone, I honestly think tradition flourishes. I personally think if they just leave us, they haven't left us alone for a number of years, but I think if they just leave us alone. Yes, I would love it if if the next pope got out there and celebrated traditional Latin Mass at St. Peter's. I mean, obviously that would be great. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine, to be honest.
Celebrate it again.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So not likely. Even Elizabeth Scalia says. Even Elizabeth Scalia is telling us that we're getting our hopes up, only to be dashed, only to be crushed when that man doesn't step out on the loggia. I'm not at all naive. I'm not of the opinion that we're going to see that kind of a guy. I believe we're going to see a Francis 2.0. And I believe that, to your point, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but you don't have to be Thomas Aquinas to know you can't bless two people in a same-sex relationship. You don't have to be a genius to know that. You can't give communion to divorce and remarriage. You can't, there's a lot of things, not all religions arrive at God, because there's only one only begotten Son of God. That's the gospel today. There's no salvation outside of Jesus Christ and his one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. You don't have to be a genius theologian to know those things. So if the guy who steps out continues in that vein, doesn't roll those things back, doesn't reaffirm church teaching on those things, regardless of how he feels about the traditional Latin Mass, Novus Ordo, or whatever, we're going to be in big trouble. It just is what it is. I don't have to love it. It is what it is. I never loved criticizing the Pope ever. It's not a thing I take pride in, but here we are.
Yeah, it's a great scandal when those things happen, and it needs to be called out. And I totally believe that, and I think that too. I just think that and I don't know one like traditional leaning or traditionalist Catholic who expects a pope to come out there who's going to be super pro Latin Mass. I mean, we all know. We've been around for a while. We know it's not like we've had any that were truly like 100% behind traditional Latin Mass for 60 years. So it's not like we expect that. Personally, I think the most likely scenario is we're going to get somebody who's somewhat of a compromise type candidate who is maybe from the peripheries, as they say, that might, give a little bit of a bonus to them. Somebody who's not necessarily, a Francis ideologue, but also is not going to be a conservative or anything like that. So that's what I think is the most likely thing to happen. If I had to bet though, which of course I won't, I would say it's more likely you're going to get a progressive than you would get a conservative. No question about that. But I think you're going to get somebody who kind of leans a little bit progressive, but isn't quite as ideological about it as Francis and some of his minions were.
All right, your number one pick. Who is your dream pick, your fantasy Pope pick coming out on the list?
Obviously, we're limiting it to cardinal electors. I'm not talking about like Bishop Athanasius Schneider or something like that. It would be Cardinal Seurat.
If you're going to fantasize, why would it have to be limited to the Cardinals? Just because.
Well, okay, if I'm fantasize, it's Bishop Athanasius Schneider is my number one pick. If I'm just saying, okay, who would you pick in the world? I'd pick Bishop Athanasius Schneider as the next Pope. So there's my dream pick.
Yeah. By the way, I did reach out to him. He was gracious enough to respond and said he didn't want to be in any interviews until after the election was over. Good for him. Good for him.
Smart move. He told us that the same thing. So which I respect.
All right, your number two pick. If you can't get Schneider, who do you get?
Cardinal Seurat. I think that he's got so much going for him. I think he would have a deep respect for the traditional Latin Mass. He would be very clear on doctrine. I think I said this in my podcast yesterday. He would be outside the Western European mindset, which I think Francis was very much in, even though he was born in Argentina. And I think that's the mindset that's really kind of undermining the church right now, is this Western European mindset that is very much obsessed with the pelvic issues, obsessed with progressivism and things of that nature.
Wow. Well, Eric, shame on you for speculating at all about the conclave. I'm going to tell Elizabeth. I'm diving you out, brother.
We're in trouble, Joe. We're in trouble.
We're so in trouble.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.